Today we are joined by Locked On Cavs host Danny Cunningham to talk about the hiring of JB Bickerstaff, the former Cavs coach, now joining the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk about everything involving his time with Cleveland and whether this is a good hire for the Detroit Pistons in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have winded down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. You'll hear more about FanDuel a little bit later. We welcome Danny Cunningham, host of the Locked On Cavs podcast, onto the Locked On Pistons podcast. Danny, thank you for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ku. What's up, man? You excited about a new coach up in Detroit?
I'm excited about finally having a coach. Yes, it was a long time. It was a while where it looked like they didn't know if Monty was going to return. Then he was let go, and there was some concern about whether it would take deep into free agency for the Pistons to actually get a coach. They did get it done literally right on I think it was the day of or right before free agency. So they went all the way up until the last minute, but more so just happy to see that they have a coach during free agency. So as all of you guys listening can assume, we're obviously just going to talk about JB Bickerstaff. I want to talk with Danny about JB Bickerstaff's offensive philosophy, some of his offensive creativity. I want to talk about some of the rumors that maybe he lost the locker room at the end of his time in Cleveland, whether that's something Pistons fans should be concerned about in Detroit. And then also to wrap it up, we'll ask Danny whether he thinks this was a good hire by the Pistons. But let's start off with the offensive creativity, Danny. I'll let you just take it from here. The main concern from the Pistons fan base over the last few coaches has been the offensive creativity of their head coaches. Dwayne Casey had some strengths. We wouldn't say that offensive creativity was one of them. Monty Williams was expected to be, maybe more in tune and cared a little more about the job. Doesn't seem like he really did. So now this team with some, maybe not so perfect fits on the offensive end of the floor is wondering, is JB Bickerstaff creative enough to make those pieces work?
So I don't think that the offensive creativity was a strength of his in Cleveland, but I don't think that it was entirely his fault. And part of that is because of the way the roster in Cleveland has been constructed, really. And I think that JB Bickerstaff's tenure can be broken down into a couple of different chapters in Cleveland, because I do think there were parts of it where he was creative offensively, but once the Cavs traded Lauri Markkanen for Donovan Mitchell in September of 2022, I was a little bit disappointed in the creativity that Bickerstaff's offense had. I thought it became a little too reliant on pick and rolls, just, having Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley set a ball screen for Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland. So I think that a lot of Cavs fans had gripes there that he just wasn't creative enough in that aspect of things. But you can also look back to the year before Donovan Mitchell got to Cleveland, when the Cavs made the play-in game. They won 44 games. They were playing not one, not two, but three big guys, where they had Jarrett Allen, they had Evan Mobley, who was in his rookie year, and really I thought had a pretty good offensive year as a rookie. And then they had Lauri Markkanen, who played a ton of small forward despite being 6'11", 7 feet tall. So I do think there was a lot of creativity there, but I think that once they loaded up with a little bit more star power and a little bit less positional versatility, that creativity for Bickerstaff wasn't where the Cavs needed it to be.
So I think one of the questions that Pistons fans have is, immediately when Bickerstaff was hired, one of the first things I saw from the community was, okay, the Cavs played a lot of two bigs that weren't outside threats. The Pistons have a lot of guys on their team who aren't outside threats, that they just drafted Ron Holland. They drafted Asar Thompson. They have Jalen Duren. Jane Ivey's been inconsistent from deep. So a lot of people, it's been a lot of the back and forth in the community of, do you move off of these players to go get legit spacers, or do you wait for them to grow into potentially becoming a spacer at one point? I'm not trying to get into that argument here. What the community was wondering was, okay, if he's coming from Cleveland, where they had to create an offense with two guys on the floor that could not, necessarily shoot the three ball. Is him coming over to Detroit actually a good thing? Because now they're bringing in someone who knows how to coach an offense without the greatest spacing. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think should be a concern?
Oh, no, I definitely think it's a good thing. And I know we'll get into my, overall thoughts on this hire coming up later in the show, but I think that it is a good thing that he does have experience in an offense that isn't exactly loaded with a plethora of shooters. And I think the other big difference between what his offenses looked like in Cleveland and what his offense is going to look like in Detroit is a guy you didn't mention, and that's Cade Cunningham. In Cleveland, he didn't have a 6'7" or 6'8". I don't know exactly what Cade's listed at, but he didn't have that big creator. He had smaller creators in Donovan Mitchell at the end, Darius Garland throughout his entire tenure. And that's a pretty big difference for me, because it is a little bit more challenging, I think, to play those two non-shooting bigs when your creators are on the smaller end of the spectrum. And the Pistons, not everyone they have is huge, but their best player is the size that you want your best player to be in the NBA. I think that is something that Bickerstaff will be able to use to his advantage. And because of that, I think the offense in Detroit is going to look a little bit different than it did in Cleveland. I think that he's someone that can be malleable towards his personnel. I just think that he couldn't quite figure out how to make the two bigs work alongside two small guards in Cleveland. And I don't know that the Pistons are going to have that same problem. And I think it's worth noting too, offensively, the Cavs' struggles mostly came in the postseason, where they struggled to crack 100 points when the game would slow down, when teams would have the opportunity to really do a thorough game plan for each and every game. And when you would see, in the case of the Cavs Magic in the first round, it's 7 games straight against the same opponent. I don't think the offense was as much of a concern for the Cavs in the regular season. I actually think they were a pretty difficult team to prepare for because they played a different style of basketball. And if I had to bet, if you're a Pistons fan and you get into next year and they're in the playoffs and the offense struggles then, you're going to be overall pretty thrilled with how the season went, because that means the Pistons were pretty good. So I do think that while there were concerns with the offense, it didn't really come until a later stage for a lot of people.
And so a question I have, building off of what you've said so far. So if Bickerstaff's offense, it seems like towards the end of the tenure was when people really started questioning it. I've had some people tell me that was more to, and you've kind of alluded to it, it had more to do with roster construction. And so my question is, did that have to do with trying to force the two non-shooters on the floor? And if it did, the Pistons, Trajan Langdon, new president of basketball operation, mentioned in his introductory press conference that spacing is probably the main priority of this offseason. And so far, the only two moves the Pistons have made is get THJ, who's a shooter, and Tobias Harris, who is a shooter. They have $26 million in cap space. I've heard that they're looking for even more spacing. So the question, a long way of getting to it, the question is, did it have more to do with the two bigs being forced on him? And if that is the case, do you think that if the Pistons provide him spacing, players that can provide spacing in this year, do you think you'll see him try to work maybe an Asar Duren lineup where it is two non-shooters like it was in Cleveland? Or do you think now that he has the personnel to go more spacing, you'll see a Cade with a lob threat and shooters surrounding that? What do you think is looking at like that?
So I think what you're going to see from Bickerstaff, at least early on, is you're going to see a lot of lineups that he puts together. There are going to be some that prioritize spacing, absolutely. But he's going to be a coach that's going to prioritize defense right away. And I think that's one of the things that, like, the Pistons, I think, at least from an outside observer, maybe you disagree with this, Koo, I think that they need sort of an injection of good culture into their organization, into the team. And I think Bickerstaff will do a great job of providing that, which is why I'm so high on this. And I think Bickerstaff's way of doing this, at least this is what he did in Cleveland, was he prioritized defense. And the Cavs became a really good defensive team. And there are going to be lineups that he's going to put together that are defense-oriented. And they're going to find ways to score, but they're going to be all about trying to stop the other team from scoring 130 points in a game. That said, there will be lineups, especially because the Pistons just have a little bit of a different roster construction than the Cavs had. You know, the Cavs didn't have a high-volume three-point shooter that's not Super Bowl dominant the way that Tobias Harris is, especially at that size. Like, they've got that high-volume guy that's not ball dominant, but Sam Merrill is like 6'2" and not a good defender. Tobias Harris is 6'7", 6'8". It's a little bit easier to keep that guy on the floor. So you will see lineups, I think, both that prioritize shooting and lineups that are going to prioritize defense. And the key for the Pistons moving forward with JB Bickerstaff is, how do you build a roster that has lineups that can prioritize both of those things at the same time? That's ultimately, when the Pistons get good, they're going to have lineups that do that.
So I want to segue this into the next segment, talking about the culture, like you brought up. I want to talk about how it ended in his time in Cleveland and how it could potentially impact Detroit. But before we get there, I do want to ask this final question. You said that he's going to prioritize defense. Just real quickly, I don't think the Pistons at this point have much defensive personnel. Do you think that JB Bickerstaff is a coach that, despite not having the greatest defensive personnel, can still try to build that defensive lay the groundwork for that defense? Is that something he did at the beginning of Cleveland, or did Cleveland start with, some pretty good defenders that he could work around? I don't think the Pistons have that right now outside of a Sar Thompson.
I mean, the Cavs obviously have some pretty good defenders on the roster, but so think back to when Bickerstaff took over, and it feels like a lifetime ago that he took over for John Beilein. It was before the COVID-19 pandemic started, is when he was named Cavs head coach. They had Colin Sexton in the backcourt, not a good defender. Darius Garland, who I think has gotten to be a better defender, but he was an awful defender at that point in his career. They didn't have Evan Mobley yet. Kevin Love was starting. Jarrett Allen was there, and he was obviously a terrific defender then. I think has only gotten better, but it's not as if they've just been filled with all defensive guys the entire time. And you can even look at as recent as this past year. Yeah, Evan Mobley is an incredible defender. Jarrett Allen, awesome defensively. Isaac Okoro, really good defender. Donovan Mitchell is average at best defensively. Darius Garland's still average at best defensively. So it's not like they've got Gary Payton at the point of attack most nights. So I do think that he's going to... The defense might not be great because a lot of that is personnel based. But what he, I believe, will do with the Pistons is get the most out of those guys defensively. Maybe, Jaden Ivey's not going to be an all defense level player, but he's going to get the best defensive version of Jaden Ivey that he can get. And that's going to be the thing that starts to elevate, because when you get one guy getting the best defense he can play and you get 5 of those on the floor, even if that defensive ceiling isn't super high, it's better than what I think it's been for the Pistons so far.
Good point. Good point. Coming up, I want to talk about the culture now. You mentioned the culture. I think that's going to be a big point, but there were some questions, according to some reports, and some fans have already dug this up and sent it to me, that maybe he lost the locker room towards the end of his time in Cleveland. Is that going to impact? Could it potentially impact his time with Detroit? We'll talk about that coming up. I love sports. I've played them my whole life. I love them my whole life, and I love them so much that I never really want them to stop. But as the playoffs have obviously winded down, we don't have very many games to pay attention to. And the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets at any time I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. I've told you guys this many times. A few years ago when betting became legal in Michigan, I didn't know where to go, didn't know what to try out, didn't know anything about it. Tried out FanDuel. I have not turned back since. Super self-explanatory, super easy to use, and most importantly, incredibly fun to use. So again, head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Danny, so you mentioned the culture. You thought that he could come to Detroit and help really establish this culture. And that is a big-time issue with Detroit right now. Trajan Langdon, in his introductory press conference, mentioned needing to establish and create a culture. I don't know if this is more so piecing stuff together, but the night they drafted Ron Holland, they asked him, Langdon that is, not Holland, but they asked Langdon, why didn't you work out Holland before the draft? And he mentioned that the Pistons were having trouble getting agents to allow them to have workouts with certain prospects. And now we're recording this on July 3rd. By the way, this is going to be scheduled out for when I'm on vacation, so hope you guys enjoy. But we're recording this on July 3rd. It's about 5 o'clock. And the Pistons have only really made 2 signings, and a lot of guys that it seemed like the Pistons were going to go after, that we heard that they were going to go after, they haven't been able to acquire. They haven't even been able to have a meeting with them. Does that play a part? I guess we won't really know, but I think it's fair to connect the dots. So, Danny, a long way of saying, at the end of the time in Cleveland, it seems like, according to reports, that J.B. Bickerstaff appeared to have lost the locker room. 1, is that true? And 2, do you think that's something, if it is true, could potentially translate to the Pistons? Do you think that some Pistons fans should be concerned about if that is true?
So I think lost the locker room is a little harsh. I don't like how that sounds. Like to me, it feels like that means there was a player mutiny, and that wasn't the case. I think that there were some guys that didn't trust J.B. Bickerstaff to be up to snuff in terms of the X's and O's. And I think some guys believe that's part of the reason why the Cavs struggled to score points in the playoffs in each of the last 2 years, because J.B. Bickerstaff wasn't creative enough offensively with what they had to work with. And we just talked about that a bunch in the first segment. The other thing that I will mention here to defend JB a little bit, I mentioned that he was he took over for John Beilein. It was a really messy situation just before the COVID-19 pandemic. When he was relieved of his duties a little more than a month ago, he was the 6th longest tenured head coach in the NBA. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of turnover in this league, that coaches come and go pretty quickly. But for him to last as long as he did, you don't do that without setting a good culture. And sometimes it's not that you do something wrong as a coach. And I don't believe JB was flawless. I think the Cavs were right to move on from him. But when you spend as much time as you do as a coach in one spot, your voice can just grow a little bit stale. It doesn't mean you're a bad coach. It doesn't mean that you're not doing well, but sometimes a change of scenery is just needed for all parties. And I sort of think that's the bucket that this Cavs job fell into. Like, I just think that, some guys in the locker room were ready to move on. I think the best thing for JB is getting a fresh start somewhere else. And I just think in time that happens. Being in somewhere for 5 years is a really long time in today's NBA, man.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't know that he was the 6th longest tenured coach at that time. But you're right. Turnover in the NBA, especially recently, has been crazy at the head coaching position. So, honestly, that is a really good point. I did not think about the fact that he did last as long as he did, and that is considered pretty long in regards to the current NBA landscape. The next question I want to ask, though, about the culture is, okay, so you mentioned defense, that he wants to, he's going to lay the groundwork defensively. There was a video circulating around Pistons Twitter right now in the Pistons community. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was the video where I think you guys had like some kind of chain that the Cavs used to, I think it was probably like the best player or something. I'm not.
It was the Junkyard Dog chain is what you're referring to. The Cavs would give it out, not necessarily to the player of the game, but like the guy who had a really gritty impact. Like sometimes it would go to the player of the game, like the night Donovan Mitchell had 71 points against the Bulls 2 seasons ago. He got the chain, pretty deservingly so. But some nights it would be someone like Jetty Osman or Lamar Stevens or Ricky Rubio, someone who had like an under the radar effort that really helped the Cavs to win.
All right. So thank you for that explanation. The clip was, though, that Bickerstaff actually was given the chain. Kevin Love stood up, a veteran in the locker room, and they kind of all surrounded Bickerstaff and were jumping on him and celebrating with him. And then he even posed afterwards and had a cool little picture with them, having fun with them. A lot of Pistons fans saw that and was like, I don't believe he lost the locker room. I don't believe, or like you said, maybe not lost the locker room, but his voice grew still. Look at how much the players love him. Should we really be concerned about that? I say that to say, is Bickerstaff basically, is he a player's coach? Do you think players, he's cool with players? Do you think players will have a great relationship with him? Or was he not as much of a player's coach and that's more of just a rare occurrence that you saw in that video?
No, I don't think that was a rare occurrence, but I would also say, things change quickly in this league. Like that video was from the 2022-2023 season, and it feels like a lifetime ago when that video was. He's a player's coach in some senses, but he's also going to be tough on guys when it merits it. Like he's not going to allow guys to not put forth their best effort, but he's also going to have their backs. Like, you are going to experience when you're watching him on the podium after games, you're going to hear him without his voice. Like he's going to lose his voice all the time because he spends so much time yelling at officials and referees because he wants to have his guys back. That's at least his explanation for it. He's going to do everything he can to protect his players, but he's also going to expect a lot out of his players too. So I do think it's a balance of, he's not some super old school coach that's always going to be yelling. He's going to be a guy that's going to build relationships, that's going to really care about his players, but he's going to expect a lot out of them as well.
Yeah, and one of the things in the Pistons community, what it seemed like a lot of the community wanted was a young, up-and-coming assistant coach, a new voice, and a guy to get his first chance to kind of grow with the young core. And something I mentioned a few episodes ago is, maybe it's because he, like you said, he did last a while with the Cavs, but Bickerstaff is not some old coach either. I think you would probably consider him a young coach. He's 45 years old. So it's not like they went, like you said, and got like an old school, old guy, one of those type of coaches. He's still a relatively young coach that can relate, I'm sure, to some of the things that go on with players. So I think that is something to tip in his cap there. Go ahead.
No, for sure. I mean, he has spent almost his entire life in the NBA. Like he's an NBA lifer. So he feels like he's been around in the league forever because he has been. But just because he spent so much time in the league doesn't mean he's actually old. Like, I think that I agree with you. That's a common misconception. You can be 40, like 45 is not old for a coach, not by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that he's been a coach for a really long time. And I think that's actually a great thing.
Yeah, I remember him being, and I'm gonna show my age here, I guess, a little bit. I remember him being like assistant coaches when I played 2K when I was younger. He'd be like one of the assistant coaches that would be on your staff, and you could elevate to a coach. Like I remember that maybe all the way back to like 2K13 or something, like going all the way back to like middle school. So he has been around for quite a while. But like I said, yeah, he's not an old coach by any means. And I'm not gonna lie to you. Seeing that video, it made me feel a little better about it. I'm not gonna lie. It made me feel just a little better about it all. But coming up, I do want to talk about now. I want to get Danny's opinion. Was this the right hire? Do you think the Pistons made the right decision on hiring JB Bickerstaff right after he was let go by the Cleveland Cavaliers? We'll talk about that coming up. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get on your way to being your best self. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy others people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, on their Twitter, on their social media, but in reality, they probably don't. Everyone was dealing with something. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Everyone's dealing with something, like I said, whether it's big, whether it's small, whether it's just a bunch of small things you're letting build up inside until it is one big thing. Everyone should have the chance to talk with somebody about that. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and the best thing about it, if you don't feel like you're vibing with that therapist, you can switch therapists just like that at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA, again, to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. I do want to thank you guys for all the support and all the new subscribers we've had over the last few weeks. We're one of the best and fastest growing fan bases at the Locked On Network. So I appreciate all of you guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope the Pistons haven't made no crazy moves while I'm gone. Again, we're recording this on the 3rd. Probably be posting like the 8th. I hope nothing crazy has happened while I'm gone. And if something crazy did happen, hopefully I was able to record it before I went out on a trip. But doing my best here, you feel me? But Danny, okay, let's go ahead and answer the question that everyone wants to hear from someone who watched JB Bickerstaff over the last few years. Do you believe the Detroit Pistons, and you may not be an expert on the Pistons, but just I think everyone understands they were the worst team in the NBA last year, and they have been one of the worst teams in the NBA over the last 5 years. I think everyone knows that they have a young franchise player in like a Cunningham, and they're trying, like you said, to start a culture and really turn this thing around and try to build something around Cade. Do you believe that JB Bickerstaff, from your perspective, was the right decision for this management to go with?
I absolutely do. I thought that he was the best hire they could have made. As soon as I saw that they parted ways with Monty Williams, I instantly thought to myself, that would be the perfect opening for JB Bickerstaff. Bickerstaff is someone that is going to rebuild this culture in Detroit. They're coming off of a 14-win season. Is Bickerstaff going to be the head coach the next time the Pistons win the NBA Finals? Probably not. But I'm pretty confident in saying that when JB Bickerstaff is no longer the coach of the Pistons, whenever that day is, they're going to be in a better place than when he got there. That I feel super confident in saying. He's going to instill a culture that Detroit badly needs. He's going to help guys grow and develop in a way that a young team always needs. With the experience he's had doing this before and seeing it firsthand in Cleveland, taking the Cavs from what they were when he took over, they were an absolute mess, similar to what the Pistons are, into a team that made it to the second round of the playoffs in, I believe, in 4 years. That's a really big jump. It's hard to go from bad to good in the NBA. It's more difficult to go from good to great. JB was awesome at getting the Cavs to go from bad to good. It was the good to great part that he couldn't quite figure out. But I'm pretty confident he'll be able to get the Pistons, and it's not going to be overnight. I wouldn't expect Detroit to, all of a sudden win 45 games next year and be in the playoffs. But they're going to be better than 14 wins. They're going to be much better next year, and then I'm willing to bet they're going to be better the year after that, presuming they're healthy. He's going to leave this team in a much better place when he leaves Detroit than when he got there.
So I guess another question I want to ask you, and this might be the last question, then we can wrap it up, but I think this is probably the most important question of it all. This coach, and someone, my friend Sham, friend of the podcast, he pointed this out on Twitter, and this is a great perspective that I haven't really seen a lot of people talk about. If this hiring, whether it was JB Bickerstaff or not, whoever this coach is, if this coach doesn't work out, it probably also means Cade Cunningham doesn't work out, and that Cade Cunningham won't last the rest of his contract, and he may be on another team. It's going to be through a trade. He's going to be asking out like that. That's where I don't feel like a lot of fans really understand that this is where the Pistons find themselves now. Like, they are at the point where they are going to offer Cade this max extension this offseason. It was already reported that they're close to getting it done. I believe just a few days ago. So once Cade signs that rookie max extension, the clock is ticking. You could argue the clock started ticking as soon as they select him with the first overall pick. But now the clock really is ticking. So with that with signing him to that extension in the same offseason, you are now hiring the third coach he's had now? This is going to be his third coach in just 4 seasons. If this coach doesn't work out, Cade Cunningham probably doesn't work out. If you end up firing JB Bickerstaff in 2 years, I'm not sure that Cade is there after that. I don't know if that's the case. So with that said, my question to you is, obviously it's different pressures, but do you feel like JB Bickerstaff ever was given a situation in Cleveland that, has this type of pressure on it? Because I do think this job is coming with a lot of pressure when it comes to, this is your young franchise player, your number one overall pick, and the clock is ticking right now to keep him in the city, to keep him with this team. Was the level of pressure he witnessed in Cleveland matching that level of pressure I think he's going to have in Detroit, and do you think he's up for that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 2 seasons ago, the Cavs won 44 games. They were one of the best stories in the NBA. They came out of nowhere. They ended up finishing 8th in the Eastern Conference. They lost 2 play-in games, didn't make the playoffs. It was an awesome story. There was no pressure. There were no real expectations, certainly not to that level going into that season. JB Bickerstaff did a fantastic job. Then the Cavs traded for Donovan Mitchell, and they said, it's time to go win. And that brought a ton of pressure, not just because it was time for them to go win, but what did you hear immediately about Donovan Mitchell when the Cavs traded for him? Oh, he only wants to be in New York. He's never going to sign an extension in Cleveland. And, Cavs fans have had a field day of a past week being able to go back through all of the takes that said he was never going to stay in Cleveland because Mitchell obviously has agreed to an extension with the Cavs. But it was not only the pressure of needing to win now because the team was so much better, but he also had the pressure of needing to be good enough to convince Donovan Mitchell to stay in town. He didn't do everything that the Cavs wanted done, because they didn't get far enough, because ultimately he wasn't creative enough offensively. But there was a ton of pressure around him for really each of the last 2 seasons. Once they traded for Donovan Mitchell, this organization became a bit of a pressure cooker because there were real expectations and they needed to do everything they possibly could in order to convince a guy that they gave up Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, and a plethora of draft picks and swaps to get. And that's a ton of pressure. That, I would say, is just as much, if not more pressure than the situation he's stepping into in Detroit.
All right, so there you have it. I think Pistons fans are probably going to feel a lot better after listening to this episode. I think Pistons fans, when the hiring initially was announced, I think there's a lot of split opinions. There's a lot of people that just was already in the camp of, well, you want a new, young, up-and-coming assistant coach with a new voice and give him a chance to grow with the team, especially because the Pistons have already went through the Stan Van Gundy, then directly into Dwayne Casey, and then directly into Monty Williams, 3 straight coaches who had been fired and then immediately picked up by the Pistons. So the fact that they had went that route again with JP Bickerstaff, I think it left a lot of fans a little concerned, and you know, rightfully so with how this team has went over the last 5 years. Like, you're going to have PTSD about basically anything this team does because of how bad it's been the last 5 years. It is what it is. And I won't sit here and cap. I was a little questioning of this hiring at the time it happened, but I didn't really have too much of an opinion either way. At this time, though, I do think the best thing, like Trajan mentioned at his press conference, building a culture and setting that culture for rookies to want to come work out for them, for agents to allow their prospects to simply have workouts, to get meetings with free agents, to be able to recruit players and them not say, Detroit, why would we go there? That's a mess from top down. Like, that should be priority number one. And if JP Bickerstaff can do that, that would be huge. And like you said, maybe he isn't the coach next time the Pistons win, an NBA championship. Who knows when that will be? Maybe he won't be the coach next time Pistons make the Eastern Conference Finals. But if he can be that bridge coach that gets them out of where they've been at the last 5 years and on the cusp of being a legit team, and who knows, maybe he is the coach at that time. But as long as he can dig them out of where they're at and they can become a respected franchise again, this is a team who's won 3 championships. When I was a kid, this is one of the most respected franchises in sports. Like, the Pistons were the team of the team. Everyone knew who the Pistons were. And now, like 10, 15 years later, they are one of the worst franchises. I mean, that's just keeping it a stack. One of the worst franchises in sports right now. So if he can get them out of that and back to where they are with their rich history, that would be the best thing possible. So I hope he's able to do it. I'm sure all Pistons fans hope he's able to do it. And I think they probably feel a lot better after listening to you talk about him, Danny. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to Pistons fans about it. Hopefully it goes well. Everyone check out Locked On Cavs if you want to have any other NBA discussions, especially obviously with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I do want to say congratulations on being able to keep Donovan Mitchell. Like you said, that was a crazy storyline for a long time, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But I'm happy to see they stayed with the small market. The small markets always get a win. I'm happy about it. So, but thank you, Danny, for coming on, man. I'll catch you later. Thank you, guys. Make Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Being available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's Danny. I'm Kook Hill. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until next time, peace out.